Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello there, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories this hour. A second shipment of aid sets off for Gaza as the UN warns of imminent famine in the besieged Palestinian enclave. Israel denies strikes on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon as fighting rages in Gaza despite UN demands for a ceasefire. A man surrenders to police in the Netherlands and releases 4 people after holding them hostage in a nightclub. And millions of voters get ready to head to the polls in Turkey in local elections to decide who runs their biggest cities. Another shipment of aid carrying 400 tons of food for Gaza has set off from Larnaca in Cyprus as the United Nations warns of imminent famine. It's the second dispatch of aid through this maritime corridor established by Cypriot authorities in cooperation with Israel and backed by the EU, US, UK and UAE. Israel has been accused of blocking aid deliveries by land, but it denies the claims, saying that UN agencies are to blame for the lack of food in Gaza. 3 United Nations peacekeepers and a translator have been injured after a shell exploded near them as they patrolled in southern Lebanon. Israel is denying reports by the Reuters news agency that their forces were behind the strike. The UN says it's investigating. Meanwhile, fighting rages in Gaza, despite a UN resolution demanding a ceasefire. Gaza officials say there have been more than 50 Israeli strikes in the past day, with civilian houses among the sites hit. Our correspondent Akram Al-Sasri has more now from Rafah.
Well, as a matter of fact, the attacks are still continuous. Around 25 minutes ago, a very loud and strong explosion was heard from this area of Rafah, and it turned out that the Israeli occupation army was targeting and destroying a whole block in Khan Yunis area. This situation of destroying whole blocks has been familiar for the last few days, where whole blocks were destroyed in Khan Yunis, whole blocks were destroyed in Gaza central area, Al-Zahra area, where around 24 residential buildings were destroyed, whole blocks were destroyed around Al-Shifa, whole blocks were destroyed around Al-Amal Hospital and Nasser Hospital. So the situation continues to aggravate, and the bombardment is still continuous, and the homes are still being destroyed, and whole blocks are wiped out by the Israeli bombardment, and people are still falling injured and dead.
Akram, what are you hearing about aid getting through? There are reports of 5 people being killed during a delivery in Gaza City.
Well, people killed and injured every single day. There is a delivery to Gaza, from the Gaza South to the Gaza and the Gaza North. The situation is extremely dire. However, there are some trucks that are already entering the Gaza and Gaza North. Around 5 trucks were allowed into Gaza North 2 days ago and last night, and also there is a coordination. It looks like the Palestinian Authority is also engaging heavily in coordinating for the entry of the trucks into Gaza and the north. However, the quantity that is allowed in, the number of trucks that is allowed in, the overall quantity of the food that is allowed into that part of Gaza Strip is still minimum, is not addressing or meeting the need of the large population there. 700,000 people are already trapped into Gaza and the north, are in need to that food. However, it looks like the international organizations are also voicing their concern. They have been voicing that concern for such a very long time. Now the ICJ, International Court of Justice, also made a ruling asking the Israeli government to increase the quantity of trucks entering the Gaza and the north. So we hope that the number would increase, but in the meantime, the number that is entering that part of Gaza is insufficient, and the overall quantities entering Gaza Strip at large are also insufficient, and the malnutrition is a commonplace among the children of Gaza, and adults also have been suffering, where some reports are showing that there is at least 1 million Gazans suffering from different health conditions that are related to public health and related to nutrition.
That was Akram Al-Sasri in Rafah. The United States has agreed to send billions of dollars worth of bombs and fighter jets to Israel, according to reports first published in the Washington Post. The weapons package comes as a public rift deepens between Israeli and American leaders, following the American refusal to veto a UN call for a ceasefire in Gaza. President Joe Biden has said that he understands the pain being felt by Arab Americans, but he faces criticism over his administration's continued support for Israel. The White House has not yet commented. Well, our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv has more now on Israel's denial that it was behind the explosion that injured a UN group in southern Lebanon.
Well, we have more details in the last few moments of exactly what happened. These were 3 United Nations observers from that UN peacekeeping mission in southern Lebanon. They were traveling initially in a car with a Lebanese translator, and we understand that a shell exploded near them during a foot patrol in southern Lebanon. That's according to the UN peacekeeping force there. Now, earlier reports reporting to the Reuters news agency said that this was an Israeli strike that hit a car carrying these observers. Now, Israel has very clearly and very quickly denied this, and at the moment from the UN we have they say that they need to establish exact circumstances before drawing conclusions. But Paul, this really highlights the level of tension, the level of danger when it comes to that area of southern Lebanon, northern Israel, that part of the country where people really fear an escalation. We know that Hezbollah and the Israeli forces have been trading fire for the last few weeks. Just in the last few seconds before coming on air, we received rocket attack warnings on the Israeli side of the border just in the last few minutes because those rockets from Hezbollah have been flying in, and retaliatory airstrikes from Israel. So certainly the details, exact details of this shell exploding near those UN observers are still to be determined, but clearly a very, very dangerous place to be operating.
And clearly the situation developing very rapidly. What's the reaction been there to reports that the United States has approved plans for the transfer of billions of dollars of bombs and fighter jets?
Yeah, that would have been broadly welcomed, particularly as we know that the U.S.-Israel relationship in the last couple of weeks has been really very strained. We've seen Anthony Blinken coming here to Tel Aviv, the U.S. Secretary of State, of course, warning Israel not to continue its military operation in Rafah, calling it a mistake. But particularly, we saw the United States abstaining at that UN Security Council resolution. So there was speculation that perhaps the Biden administration was considering pulling back on weapons deliveries to Israel if it continued to go against the wishes of its biggest ally. At the moment, that is not the case. As you said, as part of that annual $3.8 billion a year of military aid from the United States, 500-pound bombs will be delivered, 25 F-35 fighter jets and engines, as well as 1,800 2,000-pound bombs, which the Wall Street Journal has reported have previously been linked to mass casualty events in Gaza. So clearly the supply of military equipment still coming on from the U.S. despite those diplomatic and political tensions.
That was our correspondent Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv. The Chinese diplomat Wang Kejian has reiterated his country's call for a ceasefire in Gaza. He's the first envoy from Beijing to visit the region since the conflict began. He spoke exclusively to CGTN about his recent trip and China's efforts to end the fighting.
China has always been committed to promoting a ceasefire. I've visited Egypt, Palestine, Israel and Qatar, focusing on in-depth exchanges with all parties on the conflict in Gaza and listening to their opinions and suggestions. The purpose of my visit is to help the situation in Gaza cool down as soon as possible and strive to gather a consensus internationally. During this visit, I met with diplomatic officials of the countries I visited, officials of the Arab League and the head of the Hamas political bureau. The concerned parties appreciate China's positive efforts in promoting ceasefires and ending wars, easing humanitarian situations, and avoiding conflict spillovers. They expect China to play a greater role in promoting the de-escalation of conflicts.
Thousands of people have again marched through London, calling for an end to the conflict in Gaza. Saturday's demonstration had significant poignance as it coincided with the 48th anniversary of Land Day, one of the most important dates for Palestinians around the world. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports.
Almost every Saturday since this conflict began on October the 7th, protesters in London have taken to the streets calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Now, this demonstration holds extra significance. March the 30th is known to Palestinians as Land Day, and it's a commemoration of events in 1976 when several unarmed Palestinians were killed and more than 100 injured by Israeli forces during protests against Israel's confiscation of Palestinian land. Now, they mark this day by holding protests and vigils and planting olive trees to reaffirm their connection to the land.
The Palestinian struggle is rooted in attachment to the land, of course to the deprivation of rights, but fundamentally to dispossession. The vast bulk of Palestinians, of course, are living in exile, denied any access to the land physically. They cannot return to the homes from which their families were expelled in 1948. All of my family were forced to flee in 1948, so it's an important day.
Now, this protest in London comes days after the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza after several failed attempts. Now, it was the first time the United States did not veto the measure, as frustrations with its ally Israel appear to grow. The UN chief Antonio Guterres says the resolution must be implemented. The organisers of this protest hoping that the show of international unity could bring about an end to the conflict, which has so far claimed the lives of 32,000 Palestinians. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, London.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has dismissed his top aide in an ongoing cabinet reshuffle. Serhiy Shafir had served in the post of first assistant since 2019. Zelensky has been carrying out major personnel changes in his government over the past few months as Russian attacks continue. Tajikistan says many of its citizens are leaving Russia after 4 Tajiks were arrested over last week's deadly attack at a concert hall near Moscow. Tajikistan's Labour Ministry said the incident had caused panic among migrant workers from the Central Asian nation, with many now wanting to return home. Gunmen opened fire last Friday at the Crocus City Hall near the Russian capital, killing more than 140 people. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova has the latest from Moscow.
Well, indeed, we have heard from the Tajik authorities that there has been an outflow of migrants from Russia back to Tajikistan. But at the same time, the Tajik authorities are saying that is not because they are facing some sort of discrimination in Russia, but just for the fear that there could be anything of that sort. So he insisted that could be a temporary phenomenon, with those migrants actually rethinking their outflow at this moment. We also understand from the Russian authorities that they do need the labor force from the Central Asian countries. The Russian president has most recently said that there are about 10 million migrants making the labor force in Russia that is facing the labor shortage. So those migrants are indeed needed in Russia, and it does seem like the Russian authorities would be trying to do everything possible to make sure that there is no racial discrimination or any sort of hatred, once again stressing that terrorism does not know the nationality, and you cannot blame one nation for the actions of terrorists. So at the moment, we understand the Russian authorities are trying to alleviate the situation, but at the same time, the society does demand some changes and amendments made to the migration policy in order to make sure that these people are not recruited as terrorists.
And Dasha, it's been a week now since that attack at the Crocus City Hall. What's the latest on the investigation?
Well, the probe is ongoing. We understand that the Russian Investigative Committee is now working to find everyone who has been one way or another involved in the perpetration of this act of terrorism. That's why they have brought and detained 9 people, 9 suspects who are believed to be helping those attackers. We also have heard that in Tajikistan, 9 people have been detained and interrogated. The Russian authorities insist that is needed in order to make sure that they establish who actually ordered these acts of terrorism. Once again, the Russian Investigative Committee said that they got yet another evidence suggesting that Ukraine could be behind. Now they insist that the actions of the 4 shooters who were detained in Russia as they were trying to get close to the border with Ukraine, their actions were coordinated by a man who recruited and coordinated them on Telegram by sending voice messages messages in this messaging app, and he was the one who apparently told those shooters to get to Ukraine to claim their award later on. So once again, the Russian investigators insist there is a Ukrainian trace, but no evidence has been so far provided to the wider public as the case and investigation is ongoing.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. France has called on more than 40 countries to help provide security at the Olympic Games this summer. Paris has asked for thousands of extra military, police and civilian personnel to protect the millions of sports fans who are expected to attend the event. The conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East have forced the French government to raise its security alert to its highest level. British counter-terrorism police are investigating after a UK-based Iranian journalist was stabbed outside his London home. Horia Zarati, who works for Iran International, a TV station which has been critical of the government in Tehran. The network has come under repeated threats over the past 18 months. A man has been arrested and all 4 hostages have been released after an hours-long standoff at a nightclub in the Netherlands. The suspect walked out of the club in the town of Ede and surrendered to police. Streets in the area had been evacuated and trains to the town were cancelled. Associated Press correspondent Stefan de Vries reports from Amsterdam.
Well, the latest is that there is one suspect who entered a cafe, a bar, nightclub this morning very early in Ede in the east of the Netherlands, and there he took 4 staff members hostage. A party had just finished and the staff members were cleaning up the premises. He held them hostage for over 7 hours. The police is currently investigating the motives of the man who was known to the police. He was convicted last year for having threatened somebody. The exact condemnation is not really quite clear. The identity of the man is also not sure, but the police does exclude any terrorist motive. So even though the man apparently was armed with knives and allegedly also some explosives, this is not a terrorist situation. Fortunately, about an hour and a half ago, the 4 hostages, were released safely, so no people injured, and the police is currently investigating the motives of the man, his identity, and also, of course, the reason why he took hostage this morning in Ede, in the east of the Netherlands, where the town was being evacuated, but everything seems to be back to normal again here in the Netherlands.
Stefan de Vries there. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. The battle for Istanbul, how local elections in Turkey could decide the country's future.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
For China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us. And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello there, welcome back. A reminder of our headlines. Israel denies strikes on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon as fighting rages in Gaza, despite UN demands for a ceasefire. A man surrenders to police in the Netherlands and releases 4 people after holding them hostage in a nightclub. Millions of people in Turkey are set to vote in local elections on Sunday to decide who runs their biggest cities. The ruling AK party of President Erdogan is seeking to win back control of Istanbul and Ankara, which were lost to the opposition in 2019. But polls are running neck and neck. The secular Republicans are hopeful that success would lead to victory in the next general election in 5 years' time. Earlier, I spoke to Umut Korkut, Professor of International Politics at Glasgow Caledonian University. I asked him about the AKP's chances this time round.
First of all, tomorrow's elections are not a general election or a presidential election. They are local elections. However, whoever wins Istanbul, as Erdogan said once, would also win Turkey, so it's quite important for Erdogan to win Istanbul. The inflation figure as well as the interest rates in Turkey have been drastically high for over a few years now. Istanbul is expecting an earthquake, although we don't know when it will be. There will be an earthquake in Istanbul, so whoever can show that they can prepare the city the best for the earthquake is going to win the mayoral elections tomorrow.
And it really is critical, isn't it, the race in Istanbul itself? The Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu has been called the likely Republican candidate in next year's general election. What's the outlook there?
It's very early to say. As your viewers may remember, Turkey had its general elections last year, general as well as presidential elections only last year. So there are another 4 years to go until the next elections. Many things may happen in Turkish politics until then. If he wins, however, it looks like he's going to be a main contender of the current President Erdogan. It also, at the moment, according to the constitution, Erdogan cannot really run for a third time. So he's at the moment in his last tenure in presidency. However, one can see him as a possible contender in the next presidential elections if he's successful tomorrow.
And looking specifically at President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, there is speculation that he may use a win to extend his rule even further, possibly into the next decade. Is that likely?
It's early to say. Once again, we have to see what happens tomorrow with the elections. Turkey has had a referendum recently. Your viewers may remember once again that Turkey shifted from a parliamentary presidential system to a president who was elected by direct vote a few years back. So any constitutional change would need another referendum if President Erdogan is going to prolong his tenure. But what's important is that the election results tomorrow would determine actually the course of action for President Erdogan tomorrow.
And again, the Kurdish vote could determine the outcome in Istanbul as it did in 2019. How's that looking?
Not only in Istanbul, in many other places. It also determined the outcome in Ankara, actually, in a few other towns as well in 2019. Tomorrow is going to be quite important once again. But this time, though, the Kurdish party is fielding their own candidate, a female candidate, in fact, who is running. But İmamoğlu has been rather balancing, sometimes even veering away from Republican People's Party, his own party, in order to appeal to the Kurdish voters. So I presume that the Kurdish voters are going to think about whether they would like to have an AKP mayor in place or whether they would still vote for İmamoğlu, despite the fact that the Kurdish party has fielded its own candidate in order to prevent the AKP from winning Istanbul back.
Switzerland has long been known as a top skiing destination, but not this year. A lack of snow caused by a warming climate means many resorts have not been able to open at all this winter. Our correspondent Julia Lyubova reports.
This is Rušeg-Eiwald, a ski resort located a short distance from the Swiss capital Bern. It was once a thriving getaway with ski lovers, queuing to use its 2.3-kilometer-long T-bar lift. But this winter, the ski lift is at a standstill. The resort hasn't been able to open at all this season. That's because, despite being 1,300 meters above sea level, this winter there has not been enough snow. Marcel Hostetler was born in the area and runs the Rušek Eiwald ski company.
I hope we must not close in the next years, because my heart will be broken when it's closed. Never go up here with the ski lift. That's not fun. That's not fun.
The resort relies on natural snow, and during previous winters it could open for up to 70 days in a season. This year the temperatures in the Alps are warming at about twice the global average, partly because its mountains trap heat, according to a UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. Rušek Eiwald is part of the Gantrish Nature Park, with 6 other ski areas, and they've all fallen victim to climate change.
That's a big pity for us. It was nice to go to a area which was very close, and there was not a long journey to go, and the slopes are mostly prepared very nice. The staff is doing a great job, so it's really a pity for us.
Marcel Hostetler says he remains positive that the snow will return to Rušek Eiwald next year. Meanwhile, the resort plans to open more mountain bike trails to attract people back. However, as the area is protected and with cows making its fields their home in the summer, the resort's options are limited. There are over 350 ski resorts in Switzerland, but as the temperatures in the Alps are getting warmer, many find themselves too low for snow, with 65 ski lift systems already permanently closed. As the future of skiing comes into question, resorts must prepare for a life and livelihood after winter sports. Julia Lubova, CGTN, Schwarzenberg.
And finally here on The World Today, horse racing in Macau has run its final furlong after more than 40 years of pulling in the punters. The Jockey Club in Macau is closing down after a fall in crowds and in income. Racegoers did, though, turn out in huge numbers to celebrate the final race and be part of Macau's history. China's authorities are taking a punt on a new location for horse racing, with meets due to start in nearby Guangzhou next year. And a final look at our headlines here on CGTN. Israel denies strikes on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon as fighting rages in Gaza, despite United Nations demands for a ceasefire. A man has surrendered to police in the Netherlands and released 4 people after he held them hostage in a nightclub. And millions of voters get ready to head to the polls in Turkey in local elections, which could decide who runs their biggest cities. And that is The World Today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or you can scan the QR code on the screen and get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. There's more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's The Agenda with Juliet Mann. For now, though, from all the team in London, goodbye.